And welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. Happy
Hey,
Saturday. I finally remembered what day it is. That's a good thing. Here
Hola,
with my
¿qué tal?
T, John, and Steve, and we're
konbanwa.
Konbanwa.
Konbanwa, mina.
Hi. So this. Um,
元気ですか?
Watashi
元気だね.
wa very good des. Yes.
You could say orowa,
Oh,
you
oh
know,
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
the
Um,
ultra manly format.
Uh,
Bokuwa.
yeah. So yeah, it's end of a week. We're here to talk about anime. Particularly, we're here to talk about Horus, Prince of the Sun. And this is an anime film from quite a while ago. Let me just pull up the data on this. Horus,
1968.
1968, Isao Takahata's first film, the first film he directed. Story director of Grave of the Fireflies and many other things. Um, and
Any
before
other
we,
comedies?
yeah, you can see that here. I mean, boy, this is a fun one.
Yeah.
But also notable, and it's kind of worth orienting. This has Yasuo Otsuka, who went on to become one of the great animators. Hayao Miyazaki worked on scene design, did some key animation. Yasuji Mori, another great animator. Reiko Okayama, one of the first women animators in anime, worked on this as well as Yuichi Kotabe, key animator. Um, and so a lot of sort of guiding lights in this movie, and Yasuo Otsuka's sort of style kind of permeates this and became kind of a guiding light for future animators, and kind of here's kind of how to animate things in a way that's dynamic, um, and memorable in its own animation ways.
Hmm.
It has some interesting origins, which we may want to get into in terms of what it was inspired by, and also kind of some of the troubled production history behind Horus Prince of the Sun. But before we get into that, let's talk about the movie itself. And actually, really, the first thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is the just the art style, because it has a very kind of limited color palette. Um,
Yes.
and some of that is kind of understandable in the sense that there's only so much you can do visually, in terms of like your color palette for a movie, right? Like every single extra color is something else you have to paint and reference and so forth.
Right.
Um, and you can tell that the filmmakers are really trying to be as thoughtful about this as possible. And there are quite a few cool scenes where they're clearly very limiting the color palette very directly. But I'll be honest, I found the film a little drab as a result. What did you guys think in general about sort of the visuals of the film?
Well, the big surprise for me was just how it started.
Yes.
I was not expecting it to go, okay, here's a totally, water crashing on the rocks, full
Yeah.
live action, old Phil Nation, and kids swinging a battle axe around and trying to kill a bunch of wolves. And there's just like massive amount of movement
Mm-hmm.
and just the way the wolves are moving, the kids moving. It's not very stationary. There's he's jumping everywhere. The
Mm-hmm.
the, the wolves are charging and moving in different directions. Even like I
Yeah.
think there's one point where Horus looks up the rocks and there's one
Yep.
looking down at him. And actually,
Yeah.
they show it coming down
Coming down. Yeah.
instead of you referencing that it's attacking. And that really surprised me. And so I actually really liked this movie.
Mm.
So it grabbed me and it took me into the story pretty quickly.
Well, it's funny.
But the to your point about the colors though, I didn't really notice that until about a little bit further into the movie where I'm just
Mm,
kind of like things are not sharply defined
mm-hmm.
terms of the color. Like the
Yeah.
color, usually I'm used to like a bright red or a defining gray, black, or
Mm-hmm.
something of that nature. And you don't really get that in this movie.
Well, it's like in Beauty and the Beast. Belle is the only character in the village wearing blue. So as she's
Hmm.
walking through doing things, you
I
just
know
pick
that.
her out
I
in the
know
color.
that.
Yeah, the little thing
Interesting.
they did in the film. Just so you can kind of visually track her in various shots. Yeah,
Well, see, for
everyone
this,
here wears brown.
the kind of sense I got out of their palette choices would be if in 1960s you asked somebody not familiar with Scandinavian lore and not familiar with Scandinavian landscapes to describe what they think of like Vikings.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like this is probably not a color palette you wouldn't envision in a stereotype. Be like, well, Vikings wore a lot of fur, right? Like just kind of brown stuff. And they had boats, and their boats are wood, so they're brown. Scandinavia is really rocky, so it's kind of gray, and there's woods, so they're brown and green. You know what I mean? So it's like, it really does kind of play out color palette wise. It's like what a stereotype of, kind of what a lot of Scandinavia would be. The bits and splashes of color that they get are interesting because they are kind of a color palette that you would see in some Chinese traditional outfits. Some of the sort of tunic styles and the red scarf kind of things and the little details and some of that stuff. So it was very interesting. But in watching the first few bits of it and through the whole film, I got the larger feeling of like, wow, so this is like Studio Ghibli has a kid with Don Hahn and Disney, and their kid grows up. All three of them somehow have a child, and it's Orange, Prince of the Sun.
Well,
Like,
it's funny, when this movie came out, there was a reviewer who said, and I will quote, not when it came out, the Encyclopedia of Japanese Pop Culture, Mark Schilling, who reviewed it in the monthly magazine called Sun, said, wrote in 1968, in one corner of the world, there now exists a commercial animation that has surpassed Disney and started to make rapid advances. So people were absolutely very impressed at the.
I wouldn't go so far as to say surpassed. There are some interesting, for a lot of the kinetic movement that you have, for all the wolves attacking from different angles and stuff, there are still some spots in it where Horace jumps, and he's jumping in like a weird, he's moving forward. And he jumps, and what he's wearing is moving forward with him.
Yeah.
Despite how the physics of that should kind of work.
Yeah.
And the sort of playful aspect of that woo kind of jump thing is oddly awkward looking in that fashion. Like the whole wolf fight is just flying around. There's things moving. He's swinging the axe around and everything else. And then he's doing these weird jumps where he's trying to kick them and get away from them. Yeah. And it's there's some moments in it where it's just like, that's, I don't know why did you do that like that?
Yeah.
It's a really awkward look that you did for that jump. You could have done it in sort of a more natural kind of way, and you obviously have invested the effort to get that jump. Why did you do it that way?
Well, and let's go back to that wolf sequence for a second, because I think it's a great point. Since we just watched Momotaro's Divine Sea Warriors a little while ago, and then Hakujiden, Legend of the White Serpent, which was only 10 years before this came out, and same studio. This opening felt to me almost like a direct response to those movies, to say, we are not Hakujiden, we are not this stately fairy tale about, the sort of courtly romance. No, we are a kid throwing an axe at wolves. Adventure, action, violence. This is a very violent movie, and you get that right out of the gate.
But not gory violent.
No, true.
I mean, he swings the axe, and my dogs, the noises of the wolves, my dogs actually turned and looked at the speakers. They're like, what's going on? It's like, so they, they're indicating that kind of violence going on, but it's not like you see him swing the axe and one of the wolves gets its head split open. There's blood everywhere, brains flying around.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he swings it here, and the dog kind of goes off. The wolf flies off. And it's like, you don't really see a lot of violence. You just see the, swinging of the axe violence.
Did any of you in that sound, in those sounds of the wolf fight, I got the dog yipping,
Mhm.
but I heard another animal sound in there, which was chimps.
Huh.
And yeah, on impact, on axe impact.
Interesting.
The yips came around when he was kicking and they were kind of shoved out of the way or they were hit with a rock or something like that. But it feels like, I think it was around with the axe strikes that they're just kind of this weird, sharp chimp sound of pain, which is kind of just different than the others. And, you know, while it wasn't gory, you know, I picked up on that. I was just like going, oh, they're really, you know, animal pain sounds. And it's just like, okay, this added a little level of reality as opposed to, you know, the White Serpent where it's Panda Gang
Yeah.
on the head with a mallet.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And
this feels
you
grounded.
know, so it's a lot. Yeah.
Well, during the axe swinging, one of the silver wolves, he scores it right across the belly.
Yeah.
Which, you know what I mean? If you were going to bring it forward about 20 years, that would result in just everywhere. But instead, what happens? Fur is gone, and you see pink belly. Not blood, not red, not guts, nothing. It just, and there's that spot. And off the dog goes. It's like, okay, you know, that brings it up from, you know, really shocking to okay.
And I'm sure that's, you know, toy in 1968. Right?
Yeah.
Like they just could not show that in theaters, you know, no matter what was going on.
Right.
Well, they don't want to scare the living heck out of the little kids who are going to go see this nice adventure story and their parents.
Five-year-old just...
Yeah, exactly. In your opening scene.
Yeah.
And so Horace gets into the story. It has the disadvantages of being a fairy tale based story in that sometimes things just kind of happen. You know, character kind of stumbles across stuff. Yeah. Fine. Horace ends up in this village, and one of the things I love about early Takahata and Miyazaki works is the momentum. You know, they always have just this clarity of direction of their stories, which is kind of going from scene to scene to scene, very clearly motivated. And I really like that in this movie, where kind of random stuff happens, but at least you have characters reacting to that. Horace ends up in this village, and you have the fight with the giant
singing.
Fish. And we'll get to singing.
Singing.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to singing. I have thoughts on the singing.
Chinese operatic singing. This is the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, and so Horace goes and fights the giant fish. People consider this giant fish fight to be a turning point in Japanese animation. Partly because it is, and I'm not speaking out of like specific people have said this thing, just generally. The realism of the movement of the fish and the way Horace reacts to it, as well as the attention to detail in that sequence, is something rarely done up to that point in animation. You know, the way the water ripples, the way that the water, you know, flows off of the fish, things along those lines. There's just a detail to that scene that really stands out, especially from an animation perspective.
When Horace sees the pool and sees the fin,
yes,
just sort of cutting back and forth through the pool.
And it's remarkable too how it is hard in animation to give a sense of scale for things that are unnaturally large, because we're used to what, you know, the size of a fish, and that first shot of that fish, you think, oh my gosh, that's huge, despite the fact of how far away Horace is from it. So they're really effective in how they're putting all these things together. And then you have the fight with this giant fish, which he spears it in the eye, which
but again, no gut, no gut,
absolutely not.
Like spears the eye, and then it's just like it's as if you had gotten like a raindrop hit you in the eye, and you're like, oh, jeez, it's like rain in my eye. Like, no, you just speared it in the eye. There should be like stuff shooting out. You're like, nope, it's fine.
It's fine. I've always felt that this scene reminds me a lot, and I personally think the boar god scene in Princess Mononoke is partly pulling from this sequence. Because you have Ashitaka running around this thing, and there are one or two shots which seem similar, where Ashitaka runs past the boar god and it's sort of out at it. And so I wonder if they are kind of, you know, calling back a little bit to this sequence in that film. Because it does have this energy, and I love how it starts silent. It's just him and the fish, and you're just really pulled into the scene. Which is, and I say that because it's dangerous in animation to cut out sound.
Right.
Sound's one of the things that pulls you in, and so the fact that they really do that and it's still an effective scene makes it work, despite the fact that it's a boy trying to spear a fish, like without all of those other things. Just be okay. It's a big fish and he's spearing it, or whatever. But it does have kind of that dramatic power, I think, because of all those different pieces they put into it.
Well, and it's very interesting the way that drops in.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the village reaction to the father having gone toe to toe with the fish and not come out well.
Yeah.
Not to spoil it. But you have that gathering of the village. You have the machinations of the chief's second in command guy kind of fumbling around with everybody trying to influence things.
Yeah.
And then the next scene you have is Horace is 2 miles down and running fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just wait, hold on. Everybody was going to get together and do this, but no, nobody should do this independently. Nobody should risk their lives. Together we're stronger. We can do this as a community. Where's Horace?
Yeah.
It's he no announcement. You don't even really see him being I could do this alone. No, he's just 2 miles down and running.
Yeah.
Why did you do that segue?
Yeah.
And the grandfather was frustrated because here he is. Everyone's starting to collect and go, okay, we're going to go back and kill the fish.
Yep.
Yeah.
Revenge for the father. And the grandfather comes out, and everyone, and the mother is just no, we have to do this in a clever way, and sort of just calms everyone down. And grandfather throws all the harpoons down, and he's just well, what the hell's the use?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Horace is writing down. Horace has already made up his own decision on what he's going to do. And, there's that just to me, as I was watching that particular scene, I was just thinking of all the staff meetings I've ever been in when no one can come to a decision, and he just is you know what, I'm going to quietly leave this meeting and go do my job because that's what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's what it kind of felt like to me. Horace is just well, you guys are going to sit here and figure this out. I'm going to take some stabby things and try and kill this fish. Revenge for Wanda. Anyway, so
the film has very mixed messages around these things. Yes, I completely agree. It's a little odd, but yeah, we'll. So yeah,
there's some stuff.
Yeah, so you get all that, and then you get the attack of the wolves on the village, which they clearly didn't finish in time.
No,
because it's just static shots of people reacting and things coming in, and all that with audio.
Which I mean, those can be used to great effect. I mean, the static reaction shot to emphasize, a character's particular reaction can be used amazingly well.
Absolutely, this film.
And when you do it for a long period of time, static shots, it's that's all you get is oh, you guys didn't finish, did you? Somebody said you had a deadline. Yeah.
It was me about the fast forward button. Don't just watch it.
So this
and again,
film,
massive violence, arrows firing, people with swords and clubs.
You got
no blood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nobody's visibly dead. None of the wolves are visibly particularly dead.
Heck,
it's
was it Biru, whatever, the girl who's getting married, who's clearly
Birna.
Birna.
Clearly 12, but we'll get beyond that. It's can't whatever. You see her lying on the ground, and her husband picks her up tenderly. I'm oh crud! She's dying, or she's broken her legs, she's paralyzed. Nope, she's fine.
Yeah, she just take me back to the house, and then she's okay later on.
All right, weird. I should also point
Oh
out.
my goodness, that was a shocking experience. I should go have a lie down and be okay. Like,
Mhm.
all right.
I should also point out, for those who think we're being a little harsh, toy animated films at this point usually took 8 to 10 months to complete. This
Right.
one started 3 years prior. They spent 2.5 years on this film and still weren't done when they went to release it. And this isn't the only scene where they do this!
Yep.
So it just feels a little bit like a missed opportunity there. Or like, obviously something went wrong. Something went very wrong.
Which you said you were going to tell us that there were production difficulties. So
Yeah.
eager to hear why this thing did the things that it did the way that it did.
Yeah. We'll get there. So then Horace, goes and meets Hilda, who is this girl. And I want to talk about Hilda, because Hilda's an interesting character, I think. I mean, granted, we get Hilda for 3 minutes of singing over these long shots of this village. And I'll put it this way. I'll give him this.
And swinging back and forth with her two animal pals.
Yeah. Seeing the destroyed village is definitely a moment. Because you realize, oh, he came from a destroyed village. Okay, this is a big, big moment. And then they just kind of drag it out.
Yep.
And you meet Hilda, who is very much a female character of the time. This very sweet girl who's kind of doing things. And then you find out it's a little more complicated than that. What were your thoughts on Hilda as a character, both initially and kind of as the movie went on?
When she first showed up and in the decimated village, she's got her two little friends there, animal friends, and she's singing on this harp, and Horace is looking around and he finds her, and she's all alone, and there's this just very pure looking young girl, and you're just like, okay, she's clearly going to be the either the heroine or the love interest or whatever.
Cheetah.
But then it kind of and then it just, from that point, there's nothing really interesting about her. She's very plain, and except for the music, and the music are just like, after you could take about the first few bars, maybe 10 seconds, and you get the freaking point.
Yeah.
But then it goes on and on and on, and you're just like,
yes, it does.
Trying to jab yourself with something with like a dull spoon in your eye, and you're just like, okay, get to the point. And then she's very kind of mysterious at first, because you don't really know that. She doesn't really give you much.
Yeah.
But Horace is just like, come back, come with us. You don't have to be lonely. You come. You're from the same decimated village. We're probably facing the same bad person. And it's just this blank expression on her face. It's like, okay, yeah, I'd like to go. And it just, this is one of the big things in the movie that I just didn't buy into, was this character. And when she started getting a little bit more complex, when you find out her, her lineage, and you figure out that, oh, she's not everything she seems to be, you're just like, is she a Trojan horse? Is she, is this all a ruse? What is she? And after a while, I personally stopped caring after a certain point. That's fine.
Fair.
Yeah, because there's so many other things that were going on. And then, she's trying to be the embodiment of what do you rescue, what's your soul, what is it worth to you, things like that. But it just doesn't, it was there, but it just didn't play out well for me. I really didn't like the character very much. I liked the rest of the movie, but for her character, I was kind of like, okay. I felt like you could actually have done this movie without that character.
And that's the thing. And I hate to put it this way, but her cardboard persona made her probably like one of the more boring, like, potential love interests. Early on in their meeting, they're like, oh, I come from a destroyed village, you are from a destroyed village, we could be brother and sister. And she's like, oh, we could be twins. And I'm thinking, oh, that just took like a really creepy left turn on here. And it's just, And then,
granted,
yeah, she just keeps singing. I'm
mm,
like, wow, this is a skill set that you've got down pat because you don't do anything else. You
well,
wander around, you wander here and there.
it also gave me problems, and I didn't. I found her a little more interesting, but it also frustrated me about Horace because I'm like, okay, girl came from a village destroyed by a demon. You're gonna take her to another village, and you assume the village is going to accept her fine. No, no, she's cursed. They're going to assume that she's been cursed by whatever attacked her village, and they should not keep her there. And the fact that Horace is like, oh, it'll be fine. I'm like, you're an idiot. Like, you should be thinking these things through. So that hurt my opinion of him. But also, and I think this is one of those classic writing problems. You see it a lot in D&D, where someone creates this really complex backstory for a character that motivates all their decisions, but never tells you about them. And so they're introduced and they have all of these weird reactions to things, and they're just confusing. Clearly, the intent here is that she has been inserted into Horace's story very deliberately to, you know, as a Trojan horse to act out. And she's feeling conflicted, right? She is acting a part. And so she's hiding a lot of things. And so I think the implication is you're supposed to, you know, they know all the things going on in her head and all the reasons why she's acting the way she is and why she's being very reserved. We don't know that until 20 minutes later. So we see the character and she's kind of dull. And then by the time we realize there's more, we're like, well, I don't care about her anyway. So who cares? Yeah.
Well, I mean, even by the time you get a little bit more behind the curtain, you know, your brother's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Did he, like, kill your family? Did he, like, torture you? Did he, like, slap the squirrel around? Does the owl peck you in the head at night or something? You know what I mean? It's like,
by the way,
what exactly?
By the way,
makes
the
you
clearly
like this?
evil owl. Like, he shows up, and I'm like, he's
Right.
evil.
He
Like,
was-
why are you with him?
yeah.
What with the excellent, and then hence I said the sort of the wild child of Don Hahn. It's got the freaking eyes from the White Serpent of the
Yep.
duck. You know, it's got that little crazy like, oh, evil eyes. Be like, I think most people seeing that owl will be like, that ain't right.
Yeah.
That thing's wrong. Know what it's doing.
I wouldn't be surprised if
That
the.
thing's wrong.
Hey, right there. That's a perfect example of that picture right there, where it's like it just screams evil.
It was like the. It actually reminds me quite a bit of the Great Owl from The Secret of Nim. And I wonder
Ooh.
if there's a little bit of that in here. I don't know if, you know, maybe Don Bluth saw this film at some point. Who knows?
Was you know, you never can tell.
No.
I mean, was the release of this in '68 purely Japan, or it had a worldwide release so that there could have been influences across?
It's very limited.
Yeah, it got released over here eventually, like on television, things like that. But
Yeah.
it was not. Yeah, this was released for 10 days in Japan. 10 days.
3 years and got 10
Yes.
days.
And that's one of the things.
Ow.
So let's fast forward a little bit to the ending. We have the
Kaiju
required by law, everyone turns against the hero moment. Gotta have it.
And apparently can only hit him occasionally with rocks. But like, even though this like there's a huge crowd, they're like, they're flying all around him. But one like hits him in the chest. It's like, oh,
Whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
At that point, you always wonder if maybe the Wolves should win if they can't.
Right, exactly.
You know, they're, like,
Yeah.
totally-
How do these people fish? We watched the whole Happy Village fishing. They can nail a salmon with a spear and 3 feet away. Why don't you hit a kid with a rock?
Apparently not.
Well, I just love the ending for the kaiju fight, but that's just
Well, yes, that's pretty cool. Well, but then before you get to that, you get to some like sort of classic Takahata animation work, and I personally really liked the sequence of the film visually when Horace is attacked by Hilda, and you really get some intensity for her. That's like the one scene where she gets to emote. You get to see the conflict going on with her. And then he's in this with the Forest of Doubt, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I just
Which looks
really
like a
love
lake
it.
to me.
Yeah. And it's like again, it's sort of one of those classic mythical tropes where you're out in the wilderness and you're trying to find your way and you got to come to some realization. This is where we start getting the sort of everyone, he needs to get out of here. So he makes a realization. Moving on. You know,
Yeah, that great moment of like, what? Where? Hey, there's the exit. Oh my God. Really?
Yeah.
That's how you resolve your great psychological problems.
Yep.
You're like, hey, there's an exit.
Yep. Figured it out. We're
So
done.
keep in mind,
Wonderful.
so keep in mind, at this point, I was in the haze of like NyQuil, you know, and various other, you know, meds, and watching that scene where he just arbitrarily comes to, hey, I figured it out, and I'm sitting there going, what did you figure
Yeah.
out?
Yes.
I don't. You know,
Bring me with
what is
you.
going on here?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, please, because this NyQuil is really doing its job on
I
me.
want to know.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Forced of doubt. Am I watching the never-ending story? Am I going to watch a horse drown in quicksand? I mean, what is going to go happen now?
Yeah. That's what it feels like. But he finds his way out, which is great, and then he returns to the happy society that's apparently reforging the sword, even though we don't see anyone forging. Whatever, the sword is being reforged. It's happening.
Oh, and I like the way he goes to the guy who is a blacksmith,
Yeah.
whacks the sword a couple of times, and then like later in the film, where he's done no training,
No.
he
No.
spent
Yes.
no montage to like
Mhm.
learn blacksmithing
Where was that
skills.
sequence?
Oh hell no! He's in there working the forge. I'm gonna
Yep.
reforge this and have the sword of the sun. Be like, kid, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Guys, the professional is not here.
Mhm.
All you're doing basically is
No.
making noise.
That's the
thing.
That's what I love. Like the guy is like holding the tongs for Horace. It's like no, not you're Horace. You're holding them. No. Very odd. But yes, and then you have the big climax. The big climax where everyone comes together to forge the sword and fight everyone off. And people argue this might be one of the reasons why the movie had such a troubled history. Takahata and Miyazaki were famous at Toei for being union organizers. And this film is all about a village coming together, you know, and working together and organizing. And there are multiple lines in the ending about how, you know, we're better as a unit than individually, and we got to all unite, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of a, you know, thinly veiled sort of socialist propaganda piece in moments in that ending, and you get this awesome, you know, kaiju fight. You're absolutely right, between the icy woolly mammoth and the giant rock creature.
Which wouldn't it have been nice if they had filled a little bit more in on Moog, other than like he just randomly sits up there in the wolf fight.
Yep.
You pull a sword out of him, and then that's it. And then here's the end.
I'm gonna say, you know, Moog starts the movie. He like gives Horace what he needs, and he literally like he both defeats the mammoth, and he is what brings the sun in to defeat the bad guy at the end. He's the hero of the movie. He is.
And yet you only see him for these tiny little slices of time.
Mm-hmm. It's very weird.
And defeating the mammoth is just pushing it off a cliff.
Exactly.
Anybody could have done that. That's nothing.
Yeah, which is also weird because we have again this very violent movie, and he's literally like they're not even going at each other. He's like the mammoth is just kind of there, and he's just kind of slowly pushing it over. It's like, well, that's not very climatic.
Well, it tries to bite him at one point, like the mammoth gets
Yeah.
like it, and it does
Right.
have legit like it goes scarier.
Oh yeah,
Like when it's gonna bite Moog,
Mhm.
it goes from just a mouth with kind of icicles to like most of its head snaps open underneath
Yeah.
the trunk and tries to bite into Moog. And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, so icicle teeth and stone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's see right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's its attack. That's all it knows how to do. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. But it's just at the same time, it's like, yeah, and then Moog pushes it off a cliff. You know, you guys didn't even
Yeah.
give us a kernel of like the mammoth could hurt Moog, but he does like
Right.
something to. No, he just stands there, takes it, and goes, ugh. Great.
I'll
Uh-huh.
take care of the mammoth.
Yeah, and the bear reminded me of Panda from the White Serpent.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Was it
Mm.
Cora? Coco,
Oh,
whatever the heck. What is
yeah,
the bear's
I
name
think
in this
Coco.
one?
Yeah,
Coco?
something like
Oh yeah.
All I
Yeah.
can think of was just him. I was waiting for him to look at it and go, Kuma, Kuma. Like, no,
that.
don't do that. Please don't do that.
Yeah, and then 10 years after, well, no, like 6 years after this, he'd become the panda in Panda Go Panda.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Hmm.
Yeah, and then everyone comes all together and defeats everyone as a group because apparently we don't need Horus anymore. I don't know. And then we get this very confusing shot of like, so they're inside the ice castle, and they're defeating a thing, and then suddenly they're all outside the ice castle watching it collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't know how that happened. But it all collapses, and that's great. And then Hilda's dead, but she's not, I guess.
Yeah, she apparently freezes to death, and yet, much like a maiden of spring, snow melts, and she's alive. Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
For no reason, and we never understand what's going on with any. And so here's the thing: we talked about ambiguity tolerance.
And she doesn't have the life amulet,
Right.
which apparently makes you fly.
Yes, I like that. Where it's like, oh, by the way,
Do you need to fly? Have the life amulet. Like, what about you? Is that what keeps you alive? Because otherwise you froze to death. How the hell did this work?
And so so we've talked about ambiguity tolerance in the past, where a lot of movies, a lot of stories don't have to tell you every little individual detail. They leave some things for you to interpret. This is not that. I'm gonna say, because there are a lot of details here which are kind of important for the plot, like Hilda's alive. Why? Because you set up the fact that she needs this to live. Now, I assume the implication is that she's basically locked in time with the amulet. The amulet prevents her from aging. So, she doesn't, without the amulet, she's mortal, basically. But she's still, 12. So she can still live. So I don't know.
Well, she survived freezing to death, so
apparently.
Maybe she is, like you're saying, locked to the amulet. Maybe that's some of the key. Like, she can give the amulet away, but she's so bound to it, she can freeze to death in the wintertime and wake up in the spring, and she's not dead.
Which is convenient in Hokkaido. Sorry, in Norway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, just to let you guys know, when I was in the fever dream of NyQuil, perfect sense, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm no longer in the fever dream of NyQuil, I'm just like going, I did I like this again? I like that scene. I like that.
I completely agree. I enjoyed this movie. It's just it has a lot of these weird little inconsistencies all the way through. It just make it kind of frustrating. But and I'm glad you brought that up because you're absolutely right. As a just kids adventure movie, it's a fun ride. It's a roller coaster, but not tightly plotted. I would say. By the way, the reason I say Hokkaido, this is actually an Ainu tale.
Yep.
This is a legend from the Ainu people. And because they were concerned about the potential backlash of ethnically Japanese people interpreting an Ainu tale, they just put it in Norway.
Right.
Interesting, because I was looking up Grunwald, and I found the Battle of Grunwald.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, that's a little... I'm like, that's not what this is about. I'm like, that's all going in there.
Which is why they don't really look Scandinavian. They look more like, ancient Ainu, right? It's really more that. And I would say, not even like real ancient Ainu, but again, kind of the picture book version. That's where that came from. It's sort of a problematic movie in terms of production and such, where they decided to adapt another culture's story, hide it by putting it into another culture that they're not familiar with, spend 2.5 years on it, not really finish it, and make it basically give it a socialist ending during the height of the Vietnam War. So it comes out And for some reason, the studio doesn't want to give it a 6-month release. Yeah.
The studio exec after they see the first viewing in the private booth. Oh, no, no, no. Where was the supervisor for all this?
Well, I can imagine the sponsors back in this one
Oh, yeah.
must have been like,
Oh,
okay,
jeez.
you've got the finished product in the can. Can we see it? Oh,
You don't really want
it
to.
just went to the theater. We don't have a copy right now. Your check cleared, right? We're good. Okay.
It's great. There's a boy and a girl and a lot of adventure. It's great. Yeah, it's great.
It'll go well in Sapporo. We promise you. Really? Yokohama will knock him dead.
Mhm. Well,
Okay.
it's why the violence is so interesting because again, compared to like any other movie from this period, really into the 70s, you see a lot of action. You see a lot of in science fiction, ray guns and all that kind of stuff. But you don't see the kind of visceral violence you see here. I mean, again, blades hitting flesh, no blood, but
Right.
there's definitely kind of a grittiness to Horus that you really don't see in much other anime for quite a while, I think. Which I think is another reason they kind of turned off probably a lot of the studio execs and other folks who I'm like, parents might still complain. Who knows?
I was to say that the work they did with getting the wolf fights,
Yeah.
it's got a lot of a very well done swirling action going on, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't see blood. That's fine,
Yeah.
but it's like cold fingers down my spine when I hear an animal make a hurt
Yeah.
animal noise. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
I'm not,
Well, and especially in that opening sequence, it's so stark. Like you don't know what's going
Yeah.
on. It's just dozens of wolves attacking a small child. Like that gets you going.
yeah.
I was going to say this movie, while it definitely has its issues and its
Yeah.
problems, one of the things the big takeaways that I took from it was that it is superior animation in parts.
Oh yes.
Parts of the scene, right? Like the wolf fight, the fighting with the fish, and things of that nature. You can definitely tell the direction of anime that
Mhm.
the animation of anime was going in at that time, and you can tell that the people involved, this is what can happen when you have that kind of a team together.
Mhm.
And you can definitely see character designs for the next
Yeah.
15, 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the old guy, the grandfather, the Smith,
Mm.
how many?
Yeah, the
characters
hair,
were
the
based on
nose.
Yeah.
The father, Horace's father, who's got the mop of hair where you can hardly
Yep.
see anything, and the giant beard
Mm.
mustache thing. It's like whoop, 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 kind of talking.
Yeah.
Like, aha.
Mhm. Oh yeah. And,
Yes, exactly. Right there. There's a nose and a hair. That's it.
and even and even further again, this is basically Pazu and Shida from Castle in the Sky, or prototypes thereof, who would then go on to be prototypical in a lot of things. The girl has echoes of Clarice in Cagliostro, I think. There's a lot of those elements sort of woven through the mother. Is it reminds me a lot of the various mothers of Miyazaki movies.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. I wouldn't go so far as say a test platform because
No.
it had theater release and it had they spent so much time on it.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's definitely all those little kernels, little nuggets of things that moved on.
Mhm.
The fish fight. If you were experimenting with it and that was just a short, you know what I mean? I could see where you're like, now you got the mechanics down. This is how this is going to play out in the future. Now it's all cobbled together into this film, but you could see those individual parts and pieces where it's like, yeah, I see how that worked really, really well.
Well, and Takahata said this is one of the things that they did at Toei Films, that when they were working on these animated films, they would choose every movie. They would choose one aspect of filmmaking in animation to try to improve on. So they would say, okay, in this movie, we're gonna figure out how to do good crowd scenes, and we're gonna, sprinkle in crowd scenes and kind of figure all that stuff out. And then the next movie would be, something else. So maybe, I think there's a lot of like pretty realistic animal movement in this. So that might have been the focus on this one,
Right.
especially with the fish. So that you see things like, I think Kiki's Delivery Service is a great example of kind of the apotheosis of that, where you know how to do crowd scenes, and so when you get to Kiki's, you have these crowd scenes where it's, there are a few shots of like everybody moving, but it's often, 80% still, and then enough people moving to give you a sense of the movement of the crowds.
Right.
So these were, in many ways, kind of those test platforms. You're absolutely right for those things.
Well, I think certainly when you look at Moog, when you're first introduced to him, the hand pulling out, the foot
Yeah.
popping up, him standing up, and just the parts of Moog that, you know what I mean? It's like, you guys did a really good job on Moog.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a shame you didn't use more Moog. Like, you know what I mean? Because he had the way he's put together, you can follow the seams of the parts of him that are put together. It's not just sort of a blanket.
Yeah.
Coco, the bear. Poro, Coco, whatever. You don't. It's it might have been the version I was watching where it was hard to see. Like, I didn't notice any joints or elbows or any kind of lines and ligament kind of movement. It's just a general bear shape running around.
Chip and Dale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the owl, it had some fluttering of its feathers at points, but it wasn't like a detail on the movement of the owl wings where I'm like, oh wow, they really studied the hell out of that.
Speaking of which, when he's finally dealing with Hilda, I'm gonna see if I can find it. When he's finally like screaming at her. By the way, she kills him at the end. Yeah, he finally does the thing.
Feathers
He
fluttering
literally
in front of
like
her. It's just-
hovers
He just
for.
pops.
Where is that?
Yeah, and she kind of matter-of-factly does it. I mean, she doesn't
she
even
just
like. She
done.
doesn't think twice about it. She's just like, poof, and there's a puff of feathers.
He's
like,
gone.
wow.
So he's there. Where is that sequence with him? Because it was like noticeable. It was kind of hilariously weird.
And the part where Horace is having the in the ice castle, he's standing there with the sword of the sun, and all the light is reflecting off of the spears, and it's just like a strobe effect. I'm like, oh, it's like that Pokemon adventure where everybody's gonna have a stroke. Like, nice. There's nothing
There
like
it is,
inducing
yeah.
an epileptic seizure.
Hey,
Awesome.
it's great. Yeah, and again, getting back to Steve's point, I really like this film. Really, I enjoy the film. It just feels like it's 85% of what it needs to be. It feels like there are just a few little bits and pieces that need to be roughed off for it to really feel like a whole. But it's just kind of clanking along, unfortunately. But clearly, an important step.
And again, it's got good parts to it. Like it's, like it. Some of the way that it was done felt like you had different production units working on different things.
Yeah.
And that the fish scene, the wolf scene, and then like just generally when they're making Bira's wedding gown.
Yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? They feel like really different production units that then put the whole together. And some of them were better at what they did, some of them not so much, and then just more story detail, I think, really would have tied it together as a cohesive whole.
And it's another example of, I think, what happens when you do spend 2.5 years, by the time 2 years drags on, you're in a different headspace than you were 2 years prior. So the animation is going to be different, like your approach to things is going to be different, and that happens. Yeah.
Well, let's see, run it 2.5 years, 68, so that's 66. So somewhere in late 65 into 66. Yeah, things changed markedly in the world in that time period.
The production started in autumn 1965, but it was not completed until March 68. Things were happening.
We're talking vamping up bombing in Vietnam. We're talking vamping up U.S. military presence in Okinawa and in the Korean Peninsula.
Student
You know, what I mean,
protests
you're
are
talking a
happening.
lot of activity going on in the Pacific with China and Soviet, forces in the Far East. Yeah, I mean, by the time you get to 1968, the eve of the Tet Offensive,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of crap going down.
Yeah. It's yeah. And I think it shows. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that apparently Takahata was very democratic in his approach, where he very much wanted opinions from a lot of the staff. It's one of the reasons why visually, some of the character designs look very different. Because literally they had different character designers for different characters. And I think that has advantages, and I think it works in some ways in the film, but in other ways it does feel a little disjointed sometimes when you have those things interact.
Yeah, so on some of the characters, I just really kind of wondered about things like the second in command. Why?
Yeah.
Anyone else get the sense that he was wearing somebody else's skin?
The dark line.
And everything else was dark, and I was just like, please tell me he's not wearing somebody's skin. Maybe that was the NyQuil talking.
How about the little kid Manu?
Yeah.
Was the little kid Manu or Manui, whatever it was?
No whites in his
where
eyes.
It was like, dark eyes and just like this smooth face. Like there's no character face definition right there.
Yeah, there we go.
That kid. Mm-hmm. It's just like, wow, that's different than Horus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very.
Mm-hmm.
What a bold character design. No.
Yeah. No. And again, I kind of like it because it does feel different, right? It feels like different kinds of people.
Cute.
It's cute,
very
right?
Cute.
But it does have its downsides. Also, I will point out to anyone watching, because it's something people, want to know. There is a brief scene of nudity, male nudity. So just be aware of that in case your parents happen to come in at that exact scene. Like just be aware. Very innocent, but just
it's okay.
FYI.
It's one of those things where you just gotta go.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I mean, for a film that can have people swinging axes and shooting arrows and there's no violence, why in the hell changing a tunic would be necessary other than, here's my husband's tunic, put that on. Mm-hmm. Segue, now he's wearing it. Why do I...
Why do we have to see that? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to know.
It's just eye candy.
Apparently.
For I guess 10-year-old girls who need a eye candy moment for whatever.
I don't want to think about this at all. But yes.
And we're not putting that screenshot up.
No, don't do that.
No.
See, that was a very cute scene showing the sort of human side to Hilda.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and again, this is where you kind of get to understand her a bit more as a character and what's going on. But just it's funny, and I also feel bad because I feel like if this was 1968, I would adore the hell out of this film. I would be blown away by this film, comparing it to White Serpent and Alakazam the Great and all the other ones. Before. Yeah, but having seen like Castle Cagliostro and Totoro and all these other movies, it's like
living now into the second decade and going to the third decade of the 21st century. Yeah, something from 1968 is like
50 years old. Yeah. So
if I was born during the war and had seen the privations of post-war life and the sort of rebuilding of the world afterwards, and this comes out, I'm going to be blown the hell away by it. Mm-hmm. And here we are today.
Yeah.
It's some good study in how to do animation. You guys did an awesome job.
Absolutely.
And Jay, I don't think it's Native American stereotypes. They're trying to sort of work with Scandinavian.
Yeah.
The headdress on Hilda, not so much, but the tunic, I think definitely they got the Scandinavian part nailed down pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is meant to be Scandinavia. kind of, sort of, with
Yeah,
Don Bluth
it's-
characters. I don't know.
So a lot of liberties taken.
A lot of liberties taken. That's a great way of putting it. Yes. And then weird. Oh, and I should also mention very clear visuals and sort of design elements pulled from the Snow Queen, the Russian animated film from the 50s, which is one of Miyazaki's favorites. So if you're curious about that, Snow Queen. All right. I think any other thoughts on Horace before we move on? Other things?
It's a great thing to watch when you're sick and you're dosed up on NyQuil.
There we go.
Awesome, right? Actually, no. In all seriousness, if you just take it for what it is, it's actually a really nice movie.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
As I say, don't expect terribly wonderful, super things out of it. Just sort of let it roll by, and it's a very nice film.
It is. It's lovely. There's some really lovely moments in it.